Lessons learned, agile ways of working in pharma. Today's topic on All Things Disciplined Agile. I'm Joshua Barnes, and today I am joined by Kamil Mroz. He is a director at UCB and the program management lead for gene therapy. Welcome, Kamil. If you want to say a few words, a little bit more about your background and experience.
Hey, Joshua. So great to be here today. And thank you so much for the kind introduction. Uh, as you rightfully pointed out, I'm working at UCB Pharma, which is a global biopharmaceutical leader focused on creating solutions for patients living with neurological and autoimmune conditions. So focused primarily on immunology and neurology. And I work in early development on the gene therapy side of things, which is a novel modality for UCB. And I've been on a quest for the last maybe 2 years or so to try to figure out how we can bring agile ways of working and practices into that drug development space to try to speed things up, be more effective, and just as a program management lead, use tools, techniques, and approaches that can help bring value to the teams that I'm working with. And that's so important to me because at the end of the day, if we can get medicines faster to the market, to the patients who need them, I think that makes me, feel really good and feel like I'm bringing my skills and my project management experience to try to accelerate in a way drug development. But as you'll see through our discussion, it's definitely been a journey, to say the least. There's been a lot of learnings that we've picked up, and as we will surely discuss, the pharmaceutical sector may not be the most typical place to try to bring in those agile approaches because some of the constraints that we're grappling with when compared to other sectors like IT and software development. But nonetheless, we've tried to demystify agile a little bit, and hopefully we can share with you a bit of a nugget of insights to how we've done it, what we've learned, and maybe how others can kind of pick up some of the tools and tricks that we've found.
Yeah, so yeah, I can imagine outside of IT in a industry like pharma, adopting agile can be a bit challenging. And one of the things, right, in prepping for our discussion is so your development can span 10 to 15 years on a therapy, right? And so what have you learned from a how can agile work in that context, or what aspects of a rather long development cycle, right? Does agile and lean practices lend themselves to?
Exactly. Our lead time is quite significant, right? Upwards of 10 years to be able to discover and eventually launch a medicinal product. Um, and when you compare that to maybe a new piece of code or a new smartphone that's to be launched, it's totally different, and so the context in which we operate is quite different. And I'll tell you what, it's been a bit of a challenge to try to find ways to bring agile into such a long process. Um, it was a little bit overwhelming at first because when I was first getting interested in agile ways of working, our, let's say, North Star is the stuff that's coming out of IT and software. That's really where agile originated from because of some of the frustrations with waterfall, before the Agile Manifesto was published, and all the good stuff that we've seen in terms of specific approaches is coming from there. So, as a pharma PM practitioner, I look to that sector for inspiration and for, let's say, the how-tos on how to get agile into my particular sector. But it was tricky because you know scrums and typical, let's say, IT software development happen on a more regular basis. Sprints are shorter, or I don't say shorter, but there's recommendations to have them in a maybe particular time frame, which for us in the pharma sector didn't make sense, because things go a lot slower, right? If a project team is to meet every 24 hours because of the length of the studies or the experiments that we have to conduct, we basically don't have anything new to share after 24 hours. Of course, it depends on the team in which you're operating, but I'm really talking maybe some of the teams that I've worked in early development. And so I was a bit stuck. I said, oh, hold on a second, I should run a daily stand-up, but that doesn't make sense because it may be a little bit overkill for teams. So what are we going to do about this? We really want to make Agile stick, but some of the recommendations, best practices don't fit into our context. And that's when I actually started getting more and more interested in disciplined Agile, and took some of the courses there, to become a disciplined Agile senior Scrum Master and eventually a disciplined Agile coach. And one of the key messages from there is context counts. And that resonated with me very strongly because it helped me to basically step back and say, hold on a second. We don't need to basically take something off the shelf and try to force feed it into our environment, but we need to seriously think about what are the contextual constraints that we need to operate around. And so we said, let's tailor sprints and scrums and retrospectives and Kanban coordination meetings in a way that makes sense for us from a time frame perspective. Let's not have stand-ups every day. Let's have them maybe every week or every 2 weeks, alternating between specific kind of deep dive meetings that we conduct, or project team meetings. And that actually started to work. That started to make sense for us, and it started to catch on. And we're operating at a different pace when it comes to our scrums, but it's the way that we've tailored agile approaches to make sense in the context of that long lead time. So that's a little bit a way of how we've tried to get around that, right? And I think the message to those people in industries like my own, like pharma or highly regulated industries or industries that have long lead times, is really try to understand the environment in which you operate, and don't be stuck on whatever's out there. Make sure that you try to take into consideration, a good tailoring approach according to the context, and pick and choose, right? It's a toolbox at the end of the day, agile approaches, right?
Yeah.
Whatever works, whatever brings value, that's what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, right? That the strengths of Discipline Agile, in that whether you're reading the content, you're taking a course like you've done, to understand that it is based on your context, and you don't have to rigidly follow something to the letter of how it's been written or it's been designed or engineered if it's not going to be valuable to you. And I think part of what you've clearly been doing is also kind of demystifying what agile is outside of an IT area, in a industry like pharma, right? And so, I mean, I would imagine that just introducing some of that, and people thinking, well, that's for software, if they even have heard of agile, and just how you're able to figure out what's going to work and what's not, and kind of experiment with that a bit. What are some of the other things that, not to focus on like what hasn't worked, but there's oftentimes really good lessons that come out from that. So what are some of the other things, other than sort of force fitting, like, hey, we got to do a stand up every day, that you've observed in bringing agile into this industry?
Hmm. Yeah. So just maybe before I jump into that, so something you mentioned resonated with me, in terms of sometimes people being a bit lost when they're just getting to know agile and trying to apply it in their projects. Something I've realized is that when you assess the different approaches, agile approaches out there, there's some inconsistencies across them in terms of, just simply speaking, like nomenclature, right? When we talk about a scrum. We've mentioned it a few times now. In some approaches, it's called a coordination meeting. Others, it's a scrum, and others, it's a stand up. And that was something that I also I quickly learned that, like, even even though some of the agile approaches may be well defined, when you look at them in the bigger picture, it can be confusing because of the subtle. It's not even subtle. It's the differences between them. And so that was something that, as you mentioned, we tried to do. We tried to kind of demystify, like, what does it practically mean? What are we really trying to do with these approaches, or this type of meeting, or this activity? And we tried to pin it down for what it means for us. And we had a very interesting initiative about a year and a half ago with PMI Belgium. We organized an agile hackathon for drug development. And
Mm.
basically, together with PMI Belgium, we spearheaded this hackathon to just bring together PPM practitioners to look at some of the questions that we're talking about, like lead time, regulatory constraints, value adding activities. How do we optimize those? And we had some really nice case studies in where actually other companies have also been able to apply agile approaches to accelerate certain activities, or particularly seek alignment on specific activities, especially when in the drug development team you deal with very cross-functional actors with different functions coming around the table in a matricial environment, with each function having a piece of the puzzle in terms of what they bring to the team. Agile approaches can help to connect the dots and build that alignment across those different expertise areas. And that's definitely what happened to us. We had certain teams with who we were working, and we had to get alignment on specific topics in a very short period of time. So setting up a sprint with a very clear goal that's time bound, pulling them together in the Scrum format that I described, leveraging some very simple tools like just the Microsoft Teams Planner application, and getting them focused on that sprint goal, breaking that sprint goal down into the priorities in order to achieve that sprint goal, and the necessary activities, and following that up through that recurring meeting helped us to drive some of those really nice outcomes that required quick alignment of a lot of key folks on a very specific, to achieve a very specific goal in a very short period of time. And we're continuing to experiment these types of approaches still. For example, and maybe preparing, I think a good example is like when and this is something we're still a little bit experimenting with, when there are sometimes regulatory interactions that need to take place, and a pharmaceutical company needs to interact with, for example, the FDA or any regulatory. They need to prepare a lot of work beforehand in terms of briefing packages and so forth, and that's a lot of content coming from different scientific areas in the organization. And so again, another example of where the outcome is a function of a lot of different people contributing to this very, let's say, complex, let's say, piece of work, and their agile approaches can definitely help as well.
Yeah, I would imagine that as you've got all the different pieces of information from if Nate's got here, the question that was asked, the regulatory and compliance documentation, and how some of that has to come together. And if it doesn't come together at the right moments in time, you might have extra work through reworking some of that content. So that, I know the regulatory things, and that's a global issue for you, right? I mean, yes, you mentioned the FDA, but I'd imagine there's also different regulatory documentation sometimes that you've got, in across the world, which brings even more complexity to this. Do you visualize your workflow at all? And I'm asking this knowing that, how do you use Kanban boards?
Good question. So yeah, we use Kanban boards, and I think it's such a great tool. We have Kanban boards that we try to help visualize the ongoing work within the project teams.
Mhm.
Very simple Kanban boards, one pagers per function, where we have vertical columns outlining, what's to be done, what's been started and is doing, and then what's doing in an advanced form, and what's done. And we try to review those Kanban boards on a biweekly basis in the project teams that I'm working with, in order to get a visibility on the critical activities that are happening in the functions. And we're not talking about, the very specific activities. We're talking about critical activities that will drive a value-adding outcome for the team. We're not using these Kanbans as a way to micromanage. It's really a way to provide transparency for the team on what's happening in the different functions. Because a lot of times the way these uh, let's say early mission drug development teams are set up is that you have these functional experts that are great in what they do. They have very deep expertise, but sometimes what we find is that connecting the dots is so critical, because one person's output is another person's input, and it's almost like a relay race, if you will, where you need to pass the baton to different teams. And the earlier you get that visibility on what's happening across the teams, the more another team who's going to be picking up that baton can get ready, prepare for whatever's to come out, grab the
Mhm.
baton and sprint with it. And I think in that way we try to help connect the dots, put together the puzzle pieces, but really get them to the finish line and get the whole team to the finish line faster.
Yeah, excellent. So one of the things that, uh, just to draw some attention to, right? And we've got people that are in sort of team level agile coaching roles, and then we've got people that are at various, multi-team enterprise. I don't know. There's lots of different sort of titles that we see that people have on their LinkedIn profiles these days, and so one of the things that I've encountered quite a bit in organizations is that there is a bit of focus on a particular approach, or a drive to, again, keep it pure and keep it more, however that framework promotes certain events, certain activities, and so forth. And I think what you've already articulated is that you've taken a very pragmatic approach, right? And again, based on your level of experience, and then trying to understand how to bring agile. I'd imagine people in your organization, I mean, everybody wants maybe to be agile, but they really don't know what that means, and how you've been able to figure out what may or may not work, and not rigidly do things that just would have not brought benefit and turned people off, and you might not have made any progress. So kind of wrapped into that, one of the things from a DA perspective is there isn't, nobody really does DA, right? Because there's not one way of, like, one pass through all of the content and the knowledge base. One of the differentiators in addition to that is multiple life cycles. I know we've talked a little bit about how you've been able to look at some of the life cycles, whether it's the project ones that are more either time box or flow based. But there's another one that typically is for innovation or new development work, the exploratory life cycle. How have you looked at that as a way to use a very simple life cycle as it's depicted to your benefit?
Hmm. That's a great question. And I think that's a very nice life cycle to keep in mind in the pharmaceutical sector, especially when working in discovery. And it resonated strongly with me because, as you rightfully pointed out, it's a life cycle that helps to enable innovation through trying, iterating, succeeding and moving forward, or potentially failing fast and iterating again. And I think that's a lot of what we do at the scientific level in the pharmaceutical sector early on in discovery. Is, there is a potential target that we're exploring, a hit that requires scientific experiments to be able to explore deeper. And those scientific experiments are set up in a way to try to progress that and get to a specific outcome. But many times they fail, or you don't get the results that you intended, and so you need to sometimes, many times, go back to the drawing board. And when I saw that exploratory life cycle in Disciplined Agile, I thought, my goodness, that's a great place to explore and experiment with Agile, because it's just so conducive to that exploratory life cycle. And I, together with a colleague at UCB, we actually tried to do some work there, exploring a little bit how we can bring more agile approaches into that discovery side of things. A very good colleague of mine, Amulia, and he's done some great work as well. He's a scientist, but he's very curious in all things project management, and he's been a key person to for me to try to push some of these concepts forward on that front. But yeah, you just think about it, right? Agile is all about iterations, all about doing the important thing the early, and getting those things out of the way. And that's what the scientists try to do very much when trying to discover a new potential candidate for a pharmaceutical company. So I think there's a lot of potential there. And when coming back to the original question about lead times, right? When you look at the overall drug development process, yeah, sure, you're talking about upwards of 10 years, 10 to 15 years or so. But if you slice it down to different parts of that process, then you're getting into slices that become a bit more manageable from a time scale perspective. And then you're not so overwhelmed by this long lead time, but actually you can start to zoom into a 2 to 3 year period where it's not so far from the life cycles that we have in the IT and software sector. And then if you break that down even further, you can start to see maybe there are phases where agile, which are more iterative, faster approaches can be applied. So it's a place that I think is unexplored, and there's a lot more to uncover on the discovery and the more scientific side of things, together with somebody who's interested in project management. So it's maybe a shout out to the project managers out there working in that space. It's I think a lot of potential there for Agile.
So I've just got two more questions. Well, one is actually another one because it's kind of aligned with what I was going to ask. Another question that Nate Cruz here has asked. Discussing the role of leadership and cultural change with an agile transformation, or using agile within this sector. What are some of the other things that, from a leadership perspective, you can share that you've learned and had experience with over these past couple of years?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Nate. Yeah, it's a really, really, really good question, because Agile is a very trendy topic nowadays. Senior management, all levels of the organization are trying to be agile, But at the end of the day, they use that as a buzzword more than what we come to know of it as agile practitioners. And so trying to pin down what agile really means has been tough. Um, when we talk about more maybe the cultural change side of it, I think like any change, if you're going to bring new ways of working to your organization, you need to be clever and think about how you're going to position that change, not to make it too big of a leap for your teams and for your organizations. Um, Try to pilot with, let's say, key people in the organization some of the practices that you know could add value to their work. And once you have a few case studies of, let's say, agile working through some of those pilots, try to think of how to scale and scale beyond just that team and where it could potentially add value, but be open to change. That's been something that, like, and I mean that, like, be malleable in terms of pivoting as well to adapt those ways of working and practices to fit the context. That's been an important learning for me, and that's where I was stuck at the beginning, right? Seeing the different prescriptive approaches out there and thinking, oh, it's a one-way street. I need to go and apply those and make them work. They're working elsewhere, so why aren't they working here? And I very quickly realized that no, it's not, and thanks to Disciplined Agile, it's not about force fitting anything. It's about making it work and enabling those practices to bring value to your organization. And if that means tweaking them, changing them up, naming them differently so that they jive better with your organization, go ahead and do that. It's only going to make things easier for you on the change management front. There's also a nice link you can make to business agility. I think all organizations understand that we live in a very VUCA environment, business environment, and companies understand the importance of being dynamic with their capabilities and what they're offering and how they're adapting to that change. And this notion of business agility is more of a management concept that is not exactly agile, but it links very nicely with agile. So if you can show how your agile ways of working are trying to enable the organization to be more agile from a business perspective, enable more business agility, that could definitely work for you. But that means you need to make sure that it is adding value, that you're not just trying to carry out a process, a prescriptive process, because I don't think that's sustainable for that argument. So I don't know if that helps to answer the question.
Yeah, I think it does. So one last question I have, as we're getting kind of close to the time we've got allocated. Have you ever done any writing that might have been like a chapter in a book?
Josh, are you pitching the drug development for project managers book that I recently contributed to? Very nice
Is
of you.
that
Thank you
right?
for that. My colleagues, who helped co-author that will definitely be happy. And if we get some more sales through that, I think, although we're not really getting any royalties, so it's more about just promoting those best practices to the project management community in the pharmaceutical sector. But yes, Joshua, I tried to summarize some of the experiences of the last, few years or so in a chapter in this book. And for those individuals working in the pharmaceutical sector in project management or curious about project management, I would definitely recommend this book. Not because I contribute to a chapter about it, but because I think it's a really well written book. And it brings together a lot of practical views, practitioners with many years of experience contribute to it. And I think it's a really good standard for understanding, the basics, and not even the basics. I think the key concepts of project management as applied to drug development. So if you're interested, maybe we can put the link somewhere.
Yeah, just definitely. Just once we wrap up, how about if I can ask, just make a post and the title, link to it. I'm sure there'd be plenty of people that would be interested in that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Joshua.
Yeah, and thank you, Kamil. Wonderful discussion. For anybody that is out there still viewing live, or if you're watching this on replay, just post any questions that you have for Kamil, and we'll see what types of answers we can contribute over the coming days or week. A link to the book, and thanks again for all of the wonderful insights, Kamil.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me, and looking forward to maybe a future session, share how our journey is continuing, because as I said, we're not done yet.
Excellent idea. Yeah, excellent idea. All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you on our next episode of All Things DA.